The Voluntary Aid Detachment is often regarded as an organisation for voluntary service by women, particularly as nurses and in administrative and ancillary roles within hospitals. However, men also served in the Voluntary Aid Detachment, and this talk will look at some of those men, including a relative of mine. Joseph Francis Waters Bamford was born at Lishegan near Finvoy on the 24th of March 1884. He was the sixth child of William Bamford and Margaret Bamford née Ray. His birth registration omitted the name Francis. My grandfather, George William Bamford, was his elder brother by 3 years. Joseph was my granduncle. The 1901 and the 1911 censi describe him as a grocer's apprentice and later a grocer. During the Great War, Joseph volunteered and joined the Voluntary Aid Detachment, VAD, for massage work on a half-time basis. His period of service was from the 7th of May 1916 to the 31st of March 1919 at a wage of 1 guinea per week. Following the war, he worked for the National Scheme for Disabled Men at the Royal Victoria Hospital as a masseur and chiropodist. In 1920, Joseph married Frances Stanley, the daughter of a Whitehead-based Coast Guard. They had 2 daughters, Sheila and Hazel. In the 1940s, the family had settled in 38 The Mount, which at that time was an attractive residential development in East Belfast. Joseph left the hospital in 1953, aged 69. Herbert Quinn, chairman of the hospital committee, later wrote, "Our grateful thanks for the service you have so readily given at all times to the Royal Victoria Hospital." The badge for the National Scheme for Disabled Men is on the letterhead. He died in 1960. I was 4 and don't recollect ever meeting him. I will now hand over to Nigel for the remainder of the talk.
When I was preparing for this talk, I searched the VAD records website specifying UVF in the location cell. Wasn't sure what I would get, and whilst most of the hits related to women, there were record cards for 26 men. So you can see down here we've got Thomas Anderson and Michael C. Andrews. So basically I went through the various all the records for that criteria and picked out all the men and picked out their cards to see what their element of service had been. And it turned out that most of them had the same sort of, or more or less the same sort of details on their cards. And this is just one card which shows what sort of aspects of service this particular man was giving. So they were attending British Red Cross classes and drills. So it would be first aid classes and other classes associated with British Red Cross Society work, and also drills in terms of going out to collect men from hospitals or from trains. The hospital, they also provided, as you can see at the top there, it says all night duty at hospitals, UVF, Hilden and Craigavon. Now it's interesting that most people, when you talk about the UVF hospital, they would automatically think of the hospital that's at Craigavon House. But on all of these cards, the UVF hospital, or what is referred to by UVF, is actually the hospital which was at Botanic Avenue, because you can see UVF is separated or distinguished from Craigavon. The hospital at Botanic Avenue was generally used for treating the badly wounded men or men with serious illnesses. It was also the site where amputees went to be fitted for prosthetic limbs and any other sort of remedial work that needed to be done, including the likes of massage, so that the stumps of the legs or the arms could take the prosthetic limbs. The hospitals at Hilden House at Galwally and Craigavon House at Strandtown were generally used more for men who were convalescing, so men who had come from the front either sick or wounded. Once they'd had their wounds treated and their sickness treated, they would then move to Hilden or Craigavon, where they would convalesce. From November 1914, wounded servicemen were being delivered to Belfast by special ambulance trains. This is one of the ambulance trains. You can see on the front, you've got the two, the red cross on the white background to distinguish it as a hospital train, and quite possibly there would have been red crosses painted on the roof of the train. Inside, you can see the layout of the train laid out with bunks and single level beds. So they could probably pack quite a few men into each of these carriages, because you've got a set of double bunks, and then beside that you've then got single level bunks as well. These men, when they arrived at Belfast, whether it be at York Road or at Great Victoria Street, would have been transferred to the various hospitals by ambulances, including the ambulances run by the UVF. The civilian hospitals used included the Royal Victoria Hospital and the Mater Hospital, and also the Belfast Union Infirmary set aside one of its wings as a military hospital, and that was accessed by from the Donegal Road. Military authorities and men who had been wounded or sick were also treated at military hospitals in Victoria Barracks in North Belfast and Palace Barracks in Hollywood. So there's a mixture of military hospitals, pure civilian hospitals like the Royal and the Mater, and somewhere in between you had the UVF hospitals. VAD men were involved in the transport of the wounded from railway termini to the hospitals, and also between hospitals. So as a man needed to have an amputated leg fitted with a prosthetic, he would maybe be moved from Hildon through to the special unit at Botanic, and then after he had been treated there, he would be moved back to Hildon or to Craigavon House. You can see from the ambulance at the front and here that each of the ambulances was fitted out to take 4 men on stretchers. And so these guys were arriving at Belfast, and then they would have been transported to hospitals in ambulances similar to these. I'm not sure whether all of them were motorised, but certainly the ones of the UVF Hospital, Belfast, were motorised ambulances. I want to move on to talk about one of the, if I just go back a few slides, you'll see down here at the bottom, it says all-night dock patrol with the BVDC or BVD Corps from September 1915 to July 1916. Some of the cards also refer to them, to men who were carrying out duties whereby they were protecting supply depots. At this stage of the war, there was a very real threat or perception of a threat that Germany could invade Ireland or indeed the remainder of the United Kingdom. And so we have this BVD Corps. Now, it took me a bit of time to work out what that stood for. It stood for the Belfast Volunteer Defence Corps. And these similar organisations to this were set up in cities across the United Kingdom. Down in Dublin, the Irish Rugby Football Union had its defence corps. There was also a defence corps in Cork. Queen's University had one, and Belfast had a more generic one. So in essence, this organisation was a bit of a home guard for the First World War. The corps was mainly manned by volunteer Belfast businessmen who were, for various reasons, exempt from active military service or unfit for active military service. The unit was uniformed and it was armed, although each man was only issued with 5 rounds. So the first one is Robert Furley Davis, who was born on 22nd January 1866 at Queen's Walk in Nottingham, to Robert Davis, who is a lace warehouseman, and Charlotte Furley. He was educated at Nottingham High School and then at St. John's College at Cambridge University. And he graduated with the first class honours degree in 1888. He gained his master's degree in 1896 and married Elizabeth Ann Keenley-Sick, bit of an unusual name, on 10th April 1898 at Leamington in Warwickshire. In 1902, he became classics master at Campbell College, and he remained at the school until his retirement in 1931. In 1906, he translated one of the earliest known Advent hymns, Of the Father's Heart Begotten, that had been written by Aurelius Clemens Prudentius in the early 5th century. So he's obviously a guy who was very competent in terms of the classic languages, Latin and Greek. Robert Davis was 51 years old, and he was living at Rodvin on Wandsworth Road when he signed up for home service in January 1917. In 1919, he was awarded the British Red Cross badge for 2 years' service. Robert Furley Davis died on 14th February 1937 and is buried in Dundonald Cemetery. He features in a book about Dundonald Cemetery by Peter McCabe. The National Probate Calendar recorded effects of just over £2,113. In today's terms, that would be £150,450. So here you've got a guy who's an academic, works in a school, but at the weekends and at nights, he was off either serving in a hospital, and obviously overnight, maybe the number of nurses would be reduced, so they needed to have other people there if any of the patients needed to be moved around or taken to the toilet or whatever. But they were also probably there because a lot of these guys in the hospitals would have been suffering from shell shock, and on occasions they might have been violent. And so it was thought to be deemed to be necessary to have men around the place at night, just in case there were any issues that arose from that point of view. But it's unusual when you think the last person you'd expect to see patrolling Belfast docks on a Friday night would be a classics master from Campbell College. David James Hogg was another school teacher who served at home, but unlike Robert Davis, David taught in the national school system. David Hogg was born at Ballydolochan near Ballylesson on 2nd December 1873 to David Hogg, who was a land steward, and Mary Poole. In 1901, David Hogg was senior was a foreman at a stabling yard, and the family was living at Trinity Street. His elder brother was Alexander Robert Hogg, the famous Belfast photographer, and David Hogg was also a talented photographer, being the secretary of the Ulster Photographic Society in 1910. All that has survived of his photographic work is an album of photographs that's held by the Linen Hall Library. The photographs were taken in 1909 and relate to the temperance issue, and in particular to W.H. Collins. So in these two photographs, in the top photograph, W.H. Collins is seen in a bar in the Shankill Road handing out temperance leaflets. And in the lower one, he's seen overseeing a man who's just been sentenced to prison, who's signing the covenant, temperance covenant. So obviously the man, on signing the temperance covenant, that would have meant that his period of imprisonment would be reduced. And one assumes that the child that's at the front of this photograph is a relative of the man who's just been imprisoned. David Hogg married Mary Ellen Anderson at Fitzroy Avenue Presbyterian Church on 27th March 1913, and they lived at Kansas Avenue in North Belfast. David was 43 years old when he signed up for war service. He was recorded as the householder for 16 Kansas Avenue in 1924 Belfast Street Directory, but he had moved on by 1932. Where he moved to, I don't know, and when he died, I don't know. Next is John Carey, which will be of interest to Mr. Costley. John Carey of Ardluey on Cypress Park was a talented artist, illustrator, and designer. After working for Ward Partners, he entered into partnership with Richard Thompson, and their artistic letterpress business operated from Ray's building on Royal Avenue. John Carey was living at University Street when he married Rosetta Josephine Woolhauser on 28 September 1895 at Christ Church at Brondonsbury in northwest London. John Kerry was a founding member of the Belfast Arts Society and was also a member of the Ulster Academy of Arts. He was 55 years old when he engaged for war service in September 1916. Although he also carried out hospital duties, transported wounded men, and patrolled with the Belfast Volunteer Defence Corps, he also provided administrative and secretarial duties. And he held the rank of Commandant of the British Red Cross VAD number 9 district. When it says secretarial, it means that he was the secretariat rather than somebody who just took notes at meetings. John Kerry was an active member of the Moravian Church on University Road, where he held the position of treasurer. Kerry and Thompson produced the illustrated Roll of Honour to commemorate the men from the congregation who had served or died in the Great War. John Kerry and his brother Joseph both served with the VAD, but neither of them are recorded on the Roll of Honour. So obviously the congregation had taken the decision that the Roll of Honour would be strictly for men who had served with the armed forces. Other churches, other denominations took different attitudes. John Kerry died in the Royal Victoria Hospital on the 26th of April 1943 at the age of 83 after being struck by a bus. He is buried in Dundonald Cemetery along with his wife and daughter. Charles George Boas was born on 21st December 1878 at Lennoxvale to Herman Boas, a linen manufacturer, and Caroline Spears. The Boas family belonged to the Jewish faith, and Herman Boas was born in Lübeck in Germany. But he was living in Rotterdam when he married Caroline Spears in 1861. In 1911, the family was living at Windsor Park, and Charles was recorded as being a merchant. Charles Boas was 38 when he engaged for war service in October 1917. So again, here we've got somebody who was probably quite a wealthy, affluent merchant, linen merchant in Belfast, who was carrying out what he felt was sufficient war service in terms of patrolling the streets of the docks, helping out in the hospitals, doing manual labour in many respects. Arthur Greaves was born on 4th December 1865 at Ballymurphy to John Greaves and Elizabeth Pym Jackson. His father, John Greaves, and John Greaves's brother, Thomas Malcolmson Greaves, had formed the Forth River Spinning Mills with premises at Falls Road, Cooper Street, and Conway Street. Arthur Greaves went into the family firm, becoming a director, and married Eliza Marion Higginbottom on 6th April 1897. They were living at Altona on Glenmackin Road in 1901. Arthur Greaves was 50 years old when he enlisted for Home War service in October 1916, and he too was awarded the 2-year service badge by the British Red Cross Society. Arthur died on 19th December 1934 and is buried in Dundonald Cemetery, and again he features in Peter McCabe's book along with his nephew, who was also called Arthur Greaves. The National Probate Calendar valued Arthur's effects at just under £32,000 and £32,035 when he died. That equates to just over 2.3 million in today's terms. The final person I want to look at is Thomas Henry. And he was born on 3rd November 1866 in Portadown to Thomas Henry, who was a baker, and Mary Jane Campbell. Thomas Henry married Isabella Stothers on 25th December 1889 at Albert Street Presbyterian Church. Isabella had been suffering from tuberculosis for 7 months when she went into premature labour. Their daughter, Isabella Mary, was born at Grosvenor Street on the 15th of February 1891. And her mother died 2 days later at the age of 24. Thomas was a warehouseman when he married Mary Ann Craig on 19th January 1898 at Clifton Park Congregational Church. They lived at Tates Avenue in 1901 and then at Canterbury Street in 1911 with their 4 children, ranging in age from 1 month to 11 years. Thomas Henry was 48 when he volunteered in May 1915, and he worked as an orderly at the UVF hospital and assisted with incurable cases. He clocked up 4,800 hours of service. Thomas Henry was a departmental manager at McBride and William handkerchief makers of Ormeau Avenue when he collapsed and died on 26th November 1937 at the age of 71. He is buried in Belfast City Cemetery. That brings my part of the talk to an end, and I wish to apologise profusely to Mr. Richard Graham because he sent me a lovely photograph of the Greaves Mill on Falls Road, and I forgot to slot it into the PowerPoint presentations. So Richard, when you're watching this, please accept my humble apologies, and I hope you'll still manage to send me information as and when I need it. Thank you.